So I found some research that shows that there are 3 types of interactions that need to happen in order to develop what I consider rich relationships. This means relationships which have some legitimate substance and depth and growth behind them. And you might be surprised to hear what those 3 categories of interactions are, or you might not be. So here's what they are, right? Catch-up conversation has to be one of the interactions. Meaningful conversations, now that's not the surprise, needs to happen. And I'm going to define all of these in a second. And then the 3rd type of interaction that must happen in order to develop and build these rich relationships and relational wealth, obviously, which is what I call it and what this podcast is about, self-disclosure is the 3rd one. So I said I was going to define all of these, and this is based on Dan McAdams' research on the 3 levels of intimacy. So Dan McAdams did this research on the 3 levels of intimacy, which points to the 3 types of interactions that need to happen that I just discussed. So he characterizes and phrases things a little bit differently. So he calls them level 1, 2, and 3, but they parallel what we just talked about. So level 1 is equivalent to the small talk and catch-up conversation, where you're asking more general, generic questions like, what's your age? What do you do? And this zone, level 1, is where so many of us get stuck and we can't get our brains to go past this level. And maybe that's for a certain reason. And maybe that reason could be for you that you have lost trust in people because of one friendship or relationship that went sideways, and now you're just really spooked out and not sure you want to fight for that next level. And if that's you, I just want to pause here and say that just because one person broke your trust doesn't mean that we all will break your trust. And I'm saying that to you as someone who has been in that exact position in my life. And I talk more about that whenever I share my story, which I do in the very first episode of this podcast. So I'll link it up here for you to listen to if you're interested in it. But you're worth fighting for those incredible relationships because there are people out there. And I believe that we're created for connection. And the science points to that too, because of the effects of loneliness. And I don't want that for any of us. That's obviously my heart behind this podcast. Okay, sorry, side tangent. So we get stuck in this area, but level 1 of intimacy is important. This small talk, this catch-up conversation is really important for our brains because our brain has to learn the basics before we can move forward and get to know each other more. Level 2 of intimacy, or type of interaction that needs to happen, has to do with personal concerns. This is what I parallel to the concept of meaningful conversations. These are questions like motivations and values. These are questions you would ask like, what's your biggest passion? And you see someone's eyes light up. That's one of my favorite questions to ask people, by the way. Or what's the best part about your day? Where it's not just some random information as much as it's going just a little bit deeper. If we're using Shrek references, then another peel of the onion. Closer to getting to know someone's heart. Other examples of these questions are you working on anything exciting lately? And then level 3 of intimacy, according to Dan Adams, is considered self-narrative and self-disclosure. These are the pieces of you that you share with someone that you trust or want to trust. Because you can't find out if you trust someone or not until you trust them with something. So this is that 3rd and final piece in the level of intimacy that's necessary to begin creating these unbelievably close friendships. Questions that are level 3 on the level of intimacy piece are questions like, what's your biggest fear? What is your deepest fear? What drives you? Who is your hero or role model? Questions like that, where people really have to share something about themselves and oftentimes get a little bit vulnerable. I had a question I asked in college often when I wanted to hear and get to know someone's story, just for the mere fact of being inspired and encouraged by it, because I was in a rut and wasn't feeling so hopeful about life at that time myself. A question I loved asking was, Was there a moment in your life when you honestly didn't know how you would get through it, but then you did? What happened? How did you do it? That was an incredibly hope-filled question and would leave both me and the person I was sitting across from really honestly rejuvenated by getting to think about a time that we've overcome. And that whole concept is really inspiring to me. In fact, that's why I have a Rise Again tattoo on my arm. I digress. Those are the 3 levels of intimacy that are necessary to form these deep relationships.